The first crack of the whip against her back was the final bitter reminder of what life had become for Joanna Vale. Screams tore from her throat as she collapsed against the dusty ground of the ranch yard, the Arizona sun bearing witness to her humiliation as it had done so many times before. "Get up," Benjamin Vale snarled at his sister, the leather whip dangling from his hand. "Mr. Thornton paid good money for you, and I won't have you acting like some ungrateful bitch." Joanna forced herself to her knees, her honey blonde hair falling in tangles around her face. At 19, she'd already lived through more horrors than most would endure in a lifetime, and this was to be her second sale handed off like cattle to another man who saw her as property. Yuma, Arizona Territory, 1878. A harsh land for even the strongest of men, and a living nightmare for a young woman with no rights and no protection except what her body could earn. "Ben, please," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He's a monster. You know what happened last time." Benjamin Vale sneered down at his sister, his face a twisted reflection of their father's, the same father who drunk himself to death 3 years prior, leaving his son to inherit both the failing ranch and the sister he'd never wanted. "What I know is that Thornton's offering enough to clear my debts. After that, you're his problem, not mine." The ranch had once been prosperous, before drought and gambling had stripped it bare. Now all that remained of value was Joanna herself. Benjamin had first sold her at 18 to a wealthy rancher from New Mexico who'd promised to marry her. Instead, he'd kept her locked in his home for 6 months until she'd managed to escape and make the grueling journey back to Yuma, only to find her brother deeper in debt and twice as cruel. "The wagon will be here tomorrow," Benjamin said, turning away. "Clean yourself up. I won't have Thornton thinking I'm selling damaged goods." As he walked toward the dilapidated house, Joanna sank back to the dirt, her mind racing. There would be no escape from Thornton. The stories about his ranch and what happened to the women he acquired were whispered in hushed tones throughout the territory. Tomorrow. She had until tomorrow. Night fell over the Arizona desert, bringing little relief from the heat. Joanna sat on her small bed in the back room of the house, her few possessions packed in a faded carpet bag. She'd cleaned her wounds as best she could, the welts on her back stinging with every movement. The house creaked and settled in the darkness. Benjamin had ridden into town hours ago, likely to drink away his troubles at the saloon as he did most nights. It was her only chance. With trembling hands, she took the small knife she'd hidden beneath her mattress and sliced off her hair just below her ears. The golden strands fell to the floor in the moonlight. From her bag, she withdrew the clothes she'd stolen from the clothesline 2 days prior, a boy's shirt, trousers, and a worn hat that would hide what remained of her hair. Dressed in her disguise, she slipped from the house and made her way to the stable. The family's last horse, an old mare named Penny, nickered softly as Joanna approached. "SHH girl," she whispered, stroking the horse's muzzle. "We're leaving." She saddled the mare with practiced hands, having done the stable work since she was a child. Mounting carefully to avoid aggravating her wounds, Joanna turned the horse toward the desert and away from the ranch. She had no destination in mind, only escape. The vast expanse of stars above guided her as she rode through the night, putting as much distance as possible between herself and the fate that awaited her come dawn. The sun was beginning to crest the horizon when Penny stumbled, nearly sending Joanna tumbling to the ground. The mare was exhausted, and Joanna realized she couldn't push her any further without rest. In the distance, she spotted a stand of cottonwoods, the promise of water drawing her toward them. As she approached, she saw the thin ribbon of a creek winding through the dusty landscape. Dismounting, she led Penny to water and sank down on the bank, her body aching with fatigue and pain. The cool water was a blessing against her parched lips, and she splashed some on her face, washing away the dust of their journey. "Hands where I can see them, boy." The voice behind her was deep and steady, with no hint of malice but clear authority. Joanna froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Slowly she raised her hands. "Stand up. Turn around slow." She obeyed, keeping her face lowered beneath the brim of her hat. Before her stood a man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore the dust-covered clothes of a working cowboy, a worn leather vest over his shirt, and a Colt revolver holstered at his hip. "This is private land," he said, his eyes narrowed as he studied her. "What's your business here?" Joanna tried to deepen her voice. "Just passing through, sir. My horse needed water." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the Arizona sky. "You're running from something," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. "Or someone." Joanna took an instinctive step backward. "I should be on my way." As she moved, her hat slipped, and a few golden locks escaped their confinement. The man's eyes widened slightly as they fell on her face, taking in the delicate features she'd tried to hide. "You're no boy," he said quietly. In that moment, Penny chose to shake herself, and the sudden movement sent a wave of pain through Joanna's injured back. She couldn't stop the grimace that crossed her face, nor the soft gasp that escaped her lips. The man's expression changed instantly. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," she insisted, reaching for Penny's reins. "I need to keep moving." "Moving where?" he asked, making no move to stop her but blocking her path to her horse. "There's nothing but open desert for 20 miles in the direction you're headed." Tears of frustration welled in Joanna's eyes. She was too exhausted to think clearly, too frightened to trust, and too desperate to see any path forward. "Please," she whispered, abandoning the pretense of being a boy. "I can't go back." Something in her voice must have reached him, for his stance softened. "I'm Caleb Tucker," he said. "I run the Double T Ranch about a mile east of here. Whatever trouble you're in, miss, you look like you could use a meal and a safe place to rest." Joanna hesitated, weighing the risk of trusting this stranger against the certainty of what awaited her if Benjamin found her. "I'm not offering anything improper," Caleb added, seeming to read her thoughts. "My housekeeper, Mrs. Daniels, would have my hide if I suggested such a thing. She'll see to your needs, and when you're rested, you can be on your way if that's what you want." The sincerity in his blue eyes made her decision. "My name is Joanna," she said, omitting her surname. "Thank you for your kindness." Caleb nodded and retrieved his canteen from his saddle. "Drink some water. We'll get you to the ranch before it gets too hot." The Double T Ranch stood in stark contrast to the failing property Joanna had fled. Well-maintained fences surrounded lush grazing land, and cattle dotted the landscape. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and glass windows, a sign of prosperity in a land where most made do with oiled paper. As they approached, a plump woman in her 50s emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled into a severe bun, but her face was kind. "Caleb Tucker, what in heaven's name?" She stopped short when she saw Joanna, taking in her male attire and the exhaustion written across her face. "Oh, my dear, Mrs. Daniels, this is Joanna," Caleb said, helping Joanna dismount. "She needs our help." The housekeeper's assessment was quick and thorough. "Of course she does. Bring her inside while I heat water for a bath." Before Joanna could protest, she found herself ushered into the house and seated at a kitchen table with a cup of hot coffee in her hands. The kitchen was warm and smelled of baking bread, so different from the neglect and emptiness of her brother's home that tears threatened once more. "Drink that," Mrs. Daniels instructed. "Caleb, make yourself useful and bring in some fresh water." He departed without argument, leaving Joanna alone with the housekeeper. "Now then, Mrs. Daniels said, her voice gentle but firm, "Those clothes won't do, and I suspect there are injuries that need tending. Once you've bathed, we'll see to that." "I can't stay," Joanna said, though every fiber of her being longed for the safety and comfort being offered. "My brother will be looking for me." "Your brother?" Mrs. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "Is he the one responsible for your condition?" Joanna lowered her eyes, the shame of her situation washing over her anew. "I thought as much," the older woman said with a sniff of disapproval. "Well, you'll stay until you're healed at the very least. No one comes looking for strays on the Double T without going through Caleb first, and he's not a man easily intimidated." The bath was heaven. In a small room off the kitchen, Mrs. Daniels had placed a copper tub filled with warm water scented with lavender. For the first time in months, Joanna felt the layers of fear and dirt wash away. Her relief was short-lived, however, when Mrs. Daniels returned with clean towels and saw the state of her back. The older woman's sharp intake of breath told Joanna all she needed to know about how the wounds appeared. "Who did this to you, child?" Mrs. Daniels asked, her voice tight with anger. "My brother," Joanna admitted, covering herself with the towel as she stood from the bath. "He's selling me." Again, the blunt confession hung in the air between them. "Again," Mrs. Daniels repeated, her face pale. "The first time was last year. I escaped and made my way back, but this time—" Joanna shuddered. "The man who's bought me, he's known for his cruelty." Mrs. Daniels's jaw set in a determined line. "Well, he won't find you here. Let me tend those wounds and then you'll rest." Dressed in a borrowed nightgown, her back treated with a pungent but soothing salve, Joanna was led to a small bedroom on the second floor. The clean sheets and soft pillow were luxuries she hadn't experienced in years. "Rest now," Mrs. Daniels said, drawing the curtains against the midday sun. "No one will disturb you." Sleep came swiftly, pulling Joanna into its merciful embrace. When she awoke, the room was bathed in the golden light of sunset. For a moment, panic seized her as she tried to remember where she was, but the soft quilt beneath her fingers and the absence of pain in her back reminded her of her sanctuary. A knock at the door brought her fully alert. "Joanna." "It's Mrs. Daniels. I've brought you some clothes and supper." The housekeeper entered carrying a tray and a bundle of fabric. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Better, thank you," Joanna replied, sitting up carefully. "What time is it?" "Nearly 7. "You've slept the day away, which is exactly what you needed." Mrs. Daniels set the tray on the bedside table. "I've brought you a dress that belonged to Caleb's sister. She's living in San Francisco now with her husband, but she left some things behind. It should fit well enough until we can make adjustments." The dress was simple but well made, a soft blue calico that would be practical for ranch life. Joanna ran her fingers over the fabric, touched by the generosity. "I can't accept this," she said, though she longed to wear something feminine again. "I've imposed enough." Mrs. Daniels waved away her objection. "Rebecca would want you to have it. Now eat while it's hot. Caleb would like to speak with you after supper if you're feeling up to it." The thought of facing her benefactor made Joanna nervous, but she nodded. "Of course." After eating a simple but nourishing meal of stew and freshly baked bread, Joanna dressed in the borrowed clothes. The dress was a bit loose in the waist but otherwise fit well enough. She attempted to arrange her crudely cut hair into something presentable, but there was little to be done with it. When she descended the stairs, she found Caleb waiting in the parlor, a room she hadn't seen in her earlier arrival. Like the rest of the house, it was comfortable but not ostentatious, with well-worn furniture and a stone fireplace. He stood when she entered, and she was struck again by his height and the quiet strength he exuded. In the soft lamplight, she could see his features more clearly: a straight nose, firm jaw covered in a day's growth of beard, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Miss Joanna," he said, his voice warm, "you look much improved." "Thanks to your hospitality," she replied, clasping her hands before her to hide their trembling. "And Mrs. Daniels's care. Please sit." He gestured to a chair across from his own. "Mrs. Daniels mentioned some of what you told her. I hope you don't mind." Joanna lowered herself carefully onto the chair, mindful of her healing back. "No, I don't mind. You deserve to know who you've taken into your home. All I know is that you're in trouble, and that trouble involves your brother and a man who means you harm," Caleb said, leaning forward slightly. "I'd like to help, but I need to understand what we're facing." The directness of his approach was oddly comforting. There would be no pretense between them, no polite fictions to maintain. "My name is Joanna Vale," she began, watching his face for any sign of recognition. "My father owned a small ranch outside Yuma. When he died 3 years ago, my brother Benjamin inherited everything, including, it seems, me." Caleb's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "The ranch was already failing. My father wasn't a good businessman, and drought had taken its toll. Ben turned to gambling, thinking he could win enough to save the place, but it only made things worse." Joanna paused, gathering her courage for the most difficult part of her story. "Last year, when I turned 18, he sold me to a rancher from New Mexico named Harrison. The man promised to marry me, but it was a lie. He kept me locked away, used me as he pleased. Her voice broke, and she looked down at her hands. You don't have to continue, Caleb said softly. No, I want you to understand. Joanna raised her eyes to meet his. After 6 months, Harrison became careless. He left a door unlocked, and I fled. It took me weeks to make my way back to Yuma, traveling at night, stealing food when I had to. When I finally reached home, I thought Ben would be relieved, even happy to see me alive. Instead, he was furious. Because he'd already spent the money, Caleb guessed. Joanna nodded. And now he's in debt again. This time he sold me to Willard Thornton. The name hung in the air between them. Caleb's face hardened, confirming that he knew the man's reputation. Thornton was coming to collect me today now, I suppose. Ben beat me yesterday when I begged him not to go through with it. She straightened her shoulders, refusing to be ashamed of what had been done to her. So I ran. Caleb stood and walked to the window, his back to her as he gathered his thoughts. When he turned to face her again, his expression was resolute. You'll stay here as long as you need to, he said. The double T is large enough that you can remain hidden if necessary, and I have enough hands to keep watch for any unwelcome visitors. I can't ask that of you, Joanna protested. If Ben or Thornton discovers I'm here, they could bring trouble to your door. A small smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth. Miss Vale, Trouble and I are well acquainted. Besides, a man who would sell his own sister deserves whatever comes his way. The conviction in his voice stirred something in Joanna's chest, a fragile hope that perhaps there were still good men in the world. Thank you, she said simply, unable to find words adequate to express her gratitude. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Your brother and Thornton won't give up easily, especially if money has already changed hands. But you have my word there won't be a third time. No one will sell you again while I draw breath. In that moment, despite the danger that still loomed, Joanna felt truly safe for the first time in years. Dawn broke over the Double T Ranch, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Joanna stood on the back porch, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the morning chill. She'd slept better than expected, the security of the sturdy house and Caleb's promise combining to ease her fears enough for rest. Mrs. Daniels found her there, watching the sun rise. You're up early, the housekeeper remarked, joining her at the railing. How did you sleep? Well, thank you, Joanna replied with a small smile. I hope I can make myself useful today. I'm not one for sitting idle. Mrs. Daniels studied her for a moment. Your back needs more healing, but I suppose light duties wouldn't hurt. Can you cook? Yes, and sew as well. I managed our household after Mother died when I was 12. The older woman nodded approvingly. Good. You can help me in the kitchen today. The men will be coming in for breakfast soon. The kitchen was a hive of activity as they prepared a hearty meal for the ranch hands. Mrs. Daniels was an efficient teacher, showing Joanna where everything was kept and explaining the routine of feeding the workers. Caleb employs 8 full-time hands, plus a few seasonal workers during roundup, she explained as she mixed biscuit dough. They eat breakfast and supper here, take lunch in the field. Good workers, all of them, and loyal to Caleb. Has he owned the ranch long? Joanna asked, slicing bacon into a cast-iron skillet. Since his father passed 5 years ago. James Tucker was a fair man who built this place from nothing. Caleb's made it even more successful. Before long, boots sounded on the porch, and the kitchen filled with hungry men. Joanna kept her eyes lowered as Mrs. Daniels introduced her simply as Miss Joanna, who will be staying with us for a while. The men tipped their hats respectfully, their curious glances betraying that such visitors were unusual but their manners preventing any questions. Caleb was the last to enter, and Joanna felt his gaze on her as she served coffee. Good morning, Miss Vale, he said quietly. I hope you slept well. I did, thank you, she replied, meeting his eyes briefly. After breakfast, Caleb gathered his foreman, a weathered man called Hank, and 2 other hands. They spoke in low voices near the barn, and Joanna could tell from their serious expressions that the conversation concerned her. Later, as she helped Mrs. Daniels wash dishes, the housekeeper explained. Caleb's sending Hank and the boys to Yuma to see what's happening. Knowledge is power, he always says. Won't they be recognized? Joanna worried. Not likely. The Double T does business in Prescott, not Yuma. And the men know to be discreet. The day passed in a rhythm of work that was familiar and comforting to Joanna. Despite Mrs. Daniels's insistence that she rest, she found solace in the simple tasks of ranch life, kneading bread, feeding chickens, gathering eggs. With each hour that passed without alarm, her shoulders relaxed a fraction more. In the afternoon, she ventured to the corral where Caleb was working with a young horse, a bay gelding that danced nervously around the enclosure. She watched from the fence as Caleb spoke softly to the animal, his movements calm and deliberate as he introduced the saddle blanket. "He's got away with them," said a voice beside her. Joanna turned to find an older ranch hand who had introduced himself at breakfast as Pete. His weathered face was kind beneath his gray mustache. "The horses or the men?" Joanna asked with a small smile. Pete chuckled. "Both, I reckon. Been with the Tuckers since before Caleb was born. Never seen a better horseman or a fairer boss." Caleb glanced up, noticing their presence. With a final pat to the gelding's neck, he handed the lead rope to a younger hand and approached the fence. "Admiring my progress?" he asked, his smile reaching his eyes. "He seems to trust you," Joanna observed, nodding toward the horse. "Trust takes time," Caleb replied, his gaze lingering on her face. "But it's worth the effort." Pete cleared his throat and made a show of checking his pocket watch. "Best get back to mending that fence line," he said, tipping his hat to Joanna before walking away with a knowing smile. Caleb leaned against the fence, wiping dust from his forehead with his sleeve. "How are you settling in?" "Well," Joanna answered honestly, "Mrs. Daniels has been very kind and the work is comforting. You don't strike me as a woman who's afraid of hard work." "I've never had the luxury of being afraid of it," she said without self-pity. Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "My men should return by nightfall. Whatever they learn, we'll face it together." The simple promise sent warmth through her chest. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Tucker?" "You don't know me." He considered her question seriously before answering. "My father taught me that a man's character is measured by how he treats those who need his help, not by what he can gain from others." He paused, his gaze steady. "And I know enough, Miss Vale. I know you've been treated unjustly, and I know that helping you is the right thing to do." In another life, Joanna might have been wary of such nobility, might have wondered what he expected in return. But there was something in Caleb Tucker's straightforward manner that invited trust. "Thank you," she said simply. "And please call me Joanna," his smile returned. "Only if you'll call me Caleb." As dusk fell, Hank and the other men returned to the ranch. After a hushed conversation with Caleb in the study, Joanna was called in to hear their report. "Your brother's turned Yuma upside down looking for you," Hank said without preamble. "He's claiming you stole money and a horse." Joanna's face flushed with anger. "Penny was as much mine as his, and I didn't take a cent." "Doesn't matter what's true," Hank continued. "What matters is he's got the sheriff involved now." "And Thornton?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "Arrived yesterday as expected. Mean-looking fellow with 2 hired guns. He's offering a reward for information on the girl's whereabouts." Joanna felt the blood drain from her face. "How much?" $500. It was a fortune in a territory where most men worked for $1 a day. The price on her head would tempt even honest folk. "That complicates things," Caleb said, his expression grave. "But it doesn't change our course. Joanna stays here, protected, until we can resolve this legally." "Legally?" Joanna echoed, disbelief in her voice. "Caleb, there's no law that will help me. In the eyes of the court, I'm my brother's responsibility until I marry." "There are laws against selling human beings," Caleb countered. "And against the things that man Harrison did to you." Hank shifted uncomfortably. "Proving it might be difficult, boss, and the law moves slow out here." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we'll keep her safe until we can get her someplace beyond their reach. San Francisco, perhaps, where Rebecca could help her start anew." The thought of being sent away, even for her safety, filled Joanna with unexpected sadness. In just 2 days, the Double T had begun to feel like the home she'd been missing for years. "I won't bring danger to your door," she said firmly. "Perhaps I should continue on, find somewhere they wouldn't think to look." "No." Caleb's response was immediate and firm. Running alone is exactly what they expect. You're safer here with people who can protect you. The conviction in his voice left no room for argument. Joanna nodded, accepting his decision even as worry gnawed at her. She couldn't bear the thought of bringing harm to these people who had shown her nothing but kindness. Later that night, after the house had grown quiet, Joanna slipped from her room and made her way downstairs. Sleep eluded her, her mind too full of the day's revelations and the price on her head. She found herself in the kitchen, thinking to make a cup of tea to calm her nerves. To her surprise, Caleb was already there, seated at the table with a steaming mug before him. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, rising when she entered. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. He gestured to the chair across from his. "Join me, Mrs. Daniels makes a tea with chamomile that helps on restless nights." Joanna sat as he prepared a second cup. In the dim light of the single lamp, his profile was strong and reassuring. "I've been thinking," he said as he placed the tea before her, "about your situation." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "And? Your brother's legal claim on you ends if you marry." The statement hung in the air between them. Joanna stared at him, trying to read his meaning. "That's true," she said cautiously. "But I have no prospects, and even if I did, marriage has not proven to be a guarantee of safety for women in my experience." Caleb nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I wasn't suggesting just any marriage." Understanding dawned, and Joanna's breath caught in her throat. "You can't mean a marriage of convenience," he clarified quickly. "In name only. It would give you legal protection from your brother and Thornton. Once the danger has passed, we could seek an annulment if you wished." Joanna was speechless. The proposal was both shocking and, in its practicality, oddly touching. "You would do that," she finally managed. "Tie yourself to a stranger for my protection." "You're not a stranger, Joanna," he said quietly. "And yes, I would. It's the surest way to keep you safe." She studied his face, searching for any sign of ulterior motive, but found only sincere concern. "It's a generous offer," she said, "but I couldn't ask such a sacrifice from you. What about your future? Surely you had plans to marry someday for love." A shadow crossed his features. "I was engaged once, 3 years ago. She died of fever before we could wed." He met Joanna's gaze steadily. "I'm not looking to replace what I lost, but I can offer you the protection of my name and home for as long as you need it." The simplicity of his declaration moved her deeply. This was no romantic proposal, but in its honesty it held more respect than any flowery words could convey. "May I think about it?" she asked. "Of course," he replied. "It's not a decision to make lightly." They finished their tea in companionable silence, each lost in thought. When Joanna finally returned to her room, sleep came more easily, though her dreams were filled with wedding veils and the steady blue of Caleb's eyes. Morning brought clarity. After a night of reflection, Joanna knew what she must do. She found Caleb in the stables, checking the shoes on a dappled mare. "I accept your proposal," she said without preamble. Caleb straightened, studying her face. "You're certain?" "Yes, it's the most practical solution, and I'm grateful for your offer." She twisted her hands together nervously. "But I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you beyond the legal protection. I'll earn my keep here as I've been doing, and when it's safe, we can dissolve the arrangement." A small smile crossed his face. "Let's be clear about one thing, Joanna. As my wife, even in name only, you wouldn't be a servant in this house. You'd be its mistress." The thought was overwhelming. "I don't know how to be a rancher's wife." "You know more than you think," he said. "And Mrs. Daniels will remain to help. Nothing need change except your legal status." Joanna took a deep breath, steadying herself. "When? The sooner the better. I can ride to Prescott today to speak with the minister and arrange things for tomorrow, if that suits you." "So soon? The longer we wait, the more risk there is of your brother finding you," Caleb pointed out. "Unless you need more time," Joanna shook her head. "No, tomorrow is fine. I have nothing to prepare after all." For a moment, regret flashed across Caleb's features. "It's not how a woman should have to enter marriage. You deserve better than a hasty ceremony for protection." His concern touched her. "Under the circumstances, Mr. Tucker, it's more consideration than I ever expected to be shown." The next day dawned clear and bright. Mrs. Daniels, informed of the plan, had taken charge with surprising enthusiasm. She'd altered one of Rebecca's dresses for Joanna, a pale yellow creation with lace at the collar and cuffs that was the closest thing to a wedding gown available. "It's not white, but it'll do," the housekeeper declared as she helped Joanna dress. "And I've picked fresh flowers for your hair." "You don't think this is strange?" Joanna asked as Mrs. Daniels arranged the yellow roses in her short locks. The older woman's hands stilled for a moment. "Marriage for practical reasons isn't strange at all, especially out here. My own husband and I wed after knowing each other just 2 weeks. He needed a cook for his stagecoach stop, and I needed a roof over my head after my father died." Her eyes grew soft with memory. "We grew to love each other deeply over the years." "This is different," Joanna insisted. "Caleb and I have an understanding that this is temporary, Mrs. Daniels made a noncommittal sound as she returned to arranging the flowers. "Plans change, hearts change, but that's not for me to say." She stepped back to admire her work. "There, you look beautiful." The small church in Prescott was empty save for Caleb, Joanna, the minister, and Hank and Mrs. Daniels, who served as witnesses. Joanna had never been to Prescott before, and Caleb had chosen it deliberately for that reason. No one there would recognize her. As she stood beside Caleb before the altar, Joanna felt an odd mixture of emotions. Relief at the protection this marriage would provide Ward with a strange melancholy that it wasn't real, not in the way marriages were meant to be. Caleb looked handsome in his best shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaven. When he took her hand, his touch was gentle, and he offered her a reassuring smile that eased some of her nervousness. The ceremony was brief but proper. When the minister pronounced them man and wife and instructed Caleb to kiss his bride, a moment of awkwardness passed between them. Caleb solved it by leaning forward to place a chaste kiss on Joanna's cheek, his hand squeezing hers in silent understanding. "Mrs. Tucker," he said softly as they turned to face their small audience, the name both foreign and strangely right on his lips. The return to the ranch was accompanied by an impromptu celebration organized by the Hands, who had taken a genuine liking to Joanna and were more than happy to have an excuse for music and dancing. A table laden with food was set up in the yard, and someone produced a fiddle and harmonica. As dusk fell, lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Joanna found herself seated beside Caleb, watching as the ranch hands took turns dancing with Mrs. Daniels, who proved surprisingly light on her feet. "Are you all right?" Caleb asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Joanna nodded. "It's strange, but yes, I keep thinking about what happens next." "Nothing has to happen that you don't want," he assured her. "The Hands have been told our story, a simplified version at least. They know you came here in trouble and that I married you to provide protection. They respect that, and our arrangements. We have plenty of room. You'll keep your current bedroom. I'll continue to use mine." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Joanna's chest. "Thank you for being so understanding." Caleb's expression was unreadable in the flickering light. "I meant what I said yesterday. You deserve better than a marriage of convenience, but until you can have that, I'll do my best to make you comfortable here." The music changed to a slower tune, and around them, couples formed for a waltz. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Tucker?" Caleb asked, standing and offering his hand. "For appearances, if nothing else." Joanna placed her hand in his. "I'd like that." He led her to the clearing that served as a dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. As they began to move with the music, Joanna was aware of how her body responded to his nearness, the warmth that spread through her at his touch, the way her heart quickened when his eyes met hers. It was unexpected and a little frightening, these feelings for a man she barely knew. Yet as they danced beneath the stars, she couldn't help but wonder if perhaps, someday, this marriage of convenience might become something more. 2 weeks passed, settling into a routine that felt increasingly natural. Joanna took on the role of mistress of the house with growing confidence, working alongside Mrs. Daniels and learning the management of the ranch household. The men treated her with respect bordering on protectiveness, and Caleb was unfailingly considerate, if somewhat reserved. They shared meals and conversation, but little else. True to his word, Caleb maintained a proper distance, never pressuring her for anything more than companionship. At times, Joanna caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher, something warmer than simple concern, but carefully controlled. On this particular morning, Joanna was in the garden, harvesting vegetables for supper, when the sound of approaching horses drew her attention. Looking up, she saw 3 riders approaching the main house, strangers, not ranch hands returning early. Instinctively, she stepped behind the tall corn stalks, heart pounding as she tried to get a better look at the visitors. When recognition dawned, cold fear washed over her. Benjamin Vale led the small party, his face set in the hard lines she knew too well. Behind him rode Willard Thornton, a stocky man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth. The third man was clearly a hired gun, his demeanor watchful and dangerous. Joanna remained frozen in place, torn between hiding and running to warn Caleb, who was working in the south pasture. Before she could decide, Mrs. Daniels appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron as she watched the men approach. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The housekeeper called, her tone polite but wary. Benjamin dismounted, his eyes scanning the property. "I'm looking for Caleb Tucker. Is he around?" "He's out with the herd," Mrs. Daniels replied. "Expected back for dinner. Can I tell him who's calling?" "Benjamin Vale," he answered, watching carefully for any reaction to the name. "I'm looking for my sister, Joanna. I have reason to believe she might be here." Mrs. Daniels's expression remained impassive. "Mr. Tucker didn't mention expecting visitors. Perhaps you'd like to wait inside." "It's getting warm out here." The invitation was clearly a stalling tactic, but Benjamin nodded. "That would be fine, madam. Thank you." As the men followed Mrs. Daniels inside, Joanna slipped from the garden and ran toward the barn where Pete was mending tack. The older hand looked up in alarm at her approach. "Mrs. Tucker, what's wrong?" "My brother," she gasped. "He's here with Thornton. They're looking for me." Pete's weathered face hardened. "You hide in the loft. I'll get the boss." "Be careful," Joanna warned. "They're armed, and Thornton has a hired gun with him." "Wouldn't be the first time we've dealt with trouble," Pete said grimly, already moving toward the door. "Stay hidden until Caleb comes." The hayloft was hot and dusty, but Joanna found a spot near a small window where she could watch the yard without being seen. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as she waited, jumping at every sound. Finally, the thunder of hooves announced Caleb's arrival. He dismounted in a fluid motion, his expression grim as he strode toward the house. Hank and 3 other hands rode in behind him, positioning themselves casually but strategically around the yard. Joanna's heart hammered against her ribs as Caleb disappeared into the house. What would he say? How would Benjamin react? She strained to hear, but the distance was too great. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened and the men emerged. Caleb stood tall on the porch, his stance relaxed but alert. Benjamin's face was flushed with anger, while Thornton looked coldly calculating. "I don't know what game you're playing, Tucker," Benjamin's voice carried across the yard, "but if you're hiding her, there'll be consequences. She's my property." "No person is property, Vale," Caleb replied, his voice steady. "And as I've already told you, there's no one by that name here." "You're lying." Benjamin took an aggressive step forward but stopped when Hank's hand moved to his gun. "Careful," Caleb warned. "You're a guest on my land and not a particularly welcome one at the moment." Thornton placed a restraining hand on Benjamin's arm. "Perhaps Mr. Tucker hasn't been properly incentivized," he said smoothly. "I'm prepared to offer $1,000 for information leading to Joanna's return. That's twice the posted reward." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Money doesn't interest me, Mr. Thornton." "Now I believe our business is concluded. My men will escort you to the property line." "This isn't over," Benjamin snarled as he mounted his horse. "I'll be back with the sheriff." "You're welcome to do that," Caleb replied evenly, "but I doubt he'll find anything different." As the unwelcome visitors rode away under the watchful eyes of Caleb's men, Joanna climbed down from the hayloft, her legs shaky with relief and lingering fear. She stepped out of the barn just as Caleb was heading toward it, presumably to find her. When he saw her, relief washed over his features. In 3 long strides, he reached her, his hands grasping her upper arms gently as his eyes searched her face. "Are you all right?" he asked. Joanna nodded, suddenly aware of how close he stood. I saw them coming and hid. Pete went to find you. You did exactly right, he said, his grip loosening but his hands not leaving her arms. They're gone for now, but they'll be back. Benjamin is threatening to bring the sheriff from Yuma. What will we do? Worry creased her brow. To her surprise, Caleb smiled. Mrs. Tucker, I believe it's time we produced our marriage certificate. Understanding dawned. They can't touch me if I'm legally your wife. Exactly. Vale might try to claim the marriage is invalid, but we have witnesses and a proper certificate. It won't be easy for him to challenge it, especially not in Prescott where the judge knows me. The relief that flooded through Joanna was so intense that she found herself stepping forward into Caleb's embrace, her arms wrapping around his waist as she pressed her face against his chest. After a moment's hesitation, his arms encircled her, strong and secure. Thank you, she whispered against his shirt, for everything. His hand came up to stroke her hair gently. You're safe, Joanna. I promised you there wouldn't be a third time, and I meant it. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by her impulsive display, she found Caleb watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, she thought he might kiss her properly, but instead he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. We should get back to the house, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Mrs. Daniels will be worried. As they walked side by side toward the house, Joanna realized something had shifted between them. The danger they had just faced had brought into sharp focus how much Caleb had come to mean to her, and perhaps, though she hardly dared hope, how much she had come to mean to him. The threat of Benjamin and Thornton's return hung over the ranch for days, but as Caleb had predicted, the marriage certificate provided a legal shield that even Benjamin couldn't easily breach. The sheriff from Yuma did arrive, a weary man named Marshall who seemed more annoyed at being dragged into a family dispute than interested in enforcing Benjamin's claims. So you're telling me, Marshall said as he sat at the kitchen table, hat in hands, that Miss Vale misses. Tucker now, I suppose, left of her own free will and subsequently married Mr. Tucker here. That's correct, Joanna confirmed, seated beside Caleb, their hands almost but not quite touching on the table. The sheriff looked between them, his experienced eyes missing nothing. And the marriage was properly performed. With witnesses, Caleb produced the certificate, which Marshall examined carefully. Seems in order. Reverend Wilson's a good man. He turned his attention to Joanna. Your brother claims you stole money and a horse. The horse was as much mine as his, Joanna replied steadily. I helped raise her from a foal, and I took no money, though God knows I earned it with years of unpaid work. Marshall nodded slowly. He also made some unsavory accusations about the nature of your departure and this marriage. Joanna felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Caleb's voice remained calm. Sheriff, my wife left her brother's home because he was planning to sell her to Willard Thornton. It wasn't the first time he'd done so. When she came to my ranch seeking refuge, I offered her protection in the only permanent way I could manage. Sell her. Marshall's bushy eyebrows rose. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth, Joanna said quietly. The first time was to a man named Harrison in New Mexico. I escaped after 6 months of mistreatment. When I returned home, Ben arranged to sell me to Thornton. The sheriff's weathered face showed his distaste. Human trafficking's illegal, Mrs. Tucker. If what you say is true, your brother could face serious charges. I have no proof, Joanna admitted. Only my word against his. Marshall considered this, turning his hat in his hands. Well, the marriage seems legal enough. Vale doesn't have any claim on you now, that's certain. As for the horse, well, I reckon that's a civil matter if he wants to pursue it. After the sheriff departed, promising to inform Benjamin that there was no legal ground for his complaints, Caleb and Joanna stood together on the porch, watching the dust cloud of Marshall's departure. You think it's over? Joanna asked softly. Caleb's expression was thoughtful. Benjamin might give up now that the law's not on his side. Thornton is the one who concerns me. Men like him don't take kindly to losing what they consider theirs. I was never his, Joanna said fiercely. No, Caleb agreed, his hand finding hers. You never were. The touch of his fingers lacing with hers sent warmth, spiraling through Joanna's body. In the weeks since their marriage, these small points of contact had become more frequent, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing as they passed the salt, shoulders touching as they sat side by side in church. Each touch felt like a question, one she wasn't sure how to answer. The marriage that had begun as protection had grown into something else, a partnership, a friendship, and increasingly, something that made her heart race and her dreams vivid. "Caleb," she began, not certain what she wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. Before she could continue, Hank approached from the barn. "Boss, we've got trouble with the new stock in the north pasture. One of the bulls broke through the fence." Caleb squeezed her hand once before releasing it. "We'll talk later," he promised, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he turned to follow Hank. That night, Joanna sat before the small mirror in her room, brushing her hair, which had grown long enough to just brush her shoulders. The house was quiet, most of the hands having retired after supper. Caleb had returned late from dealing with the escaped bull, too tired for the conversation they'd almost begun on the porch. A soft knock at her door startled her. "Joanna, it's Caleb, may I come in?" Setting down her brush, she adjusted her robe and moved to open the door. Caleb stood in the hallway, still dressed but with his collar unbuttoned, his hair damp from washing. "I'm sorry to disturb you," he said, his eyes taking in her state of undress before politely focusing on her face. "But I've been thinking about what the sheriff said today, about having no proof against your brother." "What about it?" Joanna asked, puzzled by his intensity. "What if we could get proof, enough to ensure he never threatens you again?" Joanna frowned. "How? It would be my word against his." "Not if we could get him to admit what he did, or better yet, Thornton." Caleb's eyes gleamed with determination. "I've been thinking about it all day. If we could lure them into a trap, get them to reveal the truth with witnesses present." "It would be dangerous," Joanna protested. "Thornton isn't a fool." "No, but he's greedy and arrogant. Those are weaknesses we can exploit." Caleb leaned against the doorframe, his expression earnest. "Think about it, Joanna. If we could gather enough evidence to bring charges against them both, you'd be truly free. Not just legally protected as my wife, but free from the fear that they might someday find a way to hurt you." The idea was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What would we have to do?" "Let me work out the details," Caleb said. "But essentially, we'd spread a rumor that you're unhappy in your marriage and planning to leave. Make them think there's an opportunity to get to you when I'm away." Joanna's heart raced at the thought. "You want to use me as bait?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "I want them to think you're vulnerable, but you'd never actually be in danger. I'd make sure of that." Their eyes held, and in his, she saw a determination that matched the growing resolve in her own heart. This wasn't just about her safety anymore. It was about justice, about ensuring that Benjamin and Thornton couldn't hurt anyone else as they had hurt her. "Let me think about it," she said finally. Caleb nodded, respecting her need for consideration. He straightened from the doorframe but made no move to leave, his eyes still on her face. "There was something else I wanted to say," he began, his voice lower now, more intimate. Joanna felt her pulse quicken. "Yes, these past weeks." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "They've meant something to me, Joanna, more than I expected when I offered marriage as protection." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Joanna found herself stepping closer, drawn by the vulnerability in his usually confident demeanor. "They've meant something to me too," she admitted softly. Caleb's gaze dropped to her lips for a heartbeat before returning to her eyes. "I know we agreed this was a marriage of convenience, that you needed time and space. I've tried to honor that, but I find myself wanting more." The directness of his admission took her breath away. In her previous life, men's desires had been demands, their wants taken without regard for hers. But Caleb stood before her, powerful yet patient, offering rather than taking. "What is it you want?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Instead of answering with words, Caleb slowly raised his hand to her cheek, giving her every opportunity to step away. When she didn't, his fingers gently traced the line of her jaw, sending shivers through her body. "May I kiss you, Joanna?" he asked, his voice rough with restrained desire. "Not for appearances or convenience, but because I want to, very much." Her answer was to lean into his touch, tilting her face up to his in silent invitation. Caleb's lips met hers in a kiss that started gently, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness, and fear gave way to a hunger neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her against him as her hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, eyes wide with the revelation of what had passed between them. "Stay," Joanna whispered, surprising herself with her boldness. "Stay with me tonight." Caleb searched her face, his desire evident but his concern for her clear as well. "Are you sure? There's no rush, Joanna, we have time." In answer, she took his hand and led him into her room, closing the door behind them. This night would be a beginning not of a marriage of convenience, but of one built on choice, respect, and a love that had grown quietly but steadily between them. The plan to trap Benjamin and Thornton took shape over the following days. Word was carefully spread in Prescott that Joanna Tucker was unhappy in her hasty marriage, that Caleb was often away tending to business, leaving his new bride alone and restless on the isolated ranch. "Are you certain about this?" Caleb asked as they lay together in what was now their shared bedroom, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder in the pre-dawn light. Joanna nestled closer to him, drawing strength from his warmth. "Yes, I want this finished once and for all." The past week had transformed their relationship completely. What had begun as a practical arrangement had blossomed into a true marriage, filled with passion and tenderness that Joanna had never dared to hope for. Each night in Caleb's arms healed another piece of her wounded heart, each gentle touch erasing the memory of harsher hands. "I'll be leaving for Prescott today," Caleb said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Ostensibly for a cattle sale that will keep me away for 3 days. In reality, I'll only be gone a few hours to make sure our bait is taken. And I'll be here, the poor abandoned bride," Joanna said with a small smile, "with only Mrs. Daniels and Pete for company as far as anyone knows." What Benjamin and Thornton wouldn't know was that Hank and the other hands would be hidden throughout the property, along with the sheriff from Prescott and a federal marshal who owed Caleb a favor. "If they don't come," Caleb began. "Then we'll be no worse off than we are now," Joanna finished. "But they'll come. Ben never could resist what he sees as easy money, and Thornton's pride won't let him walk away." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "I don't like leaving you, even with all our precautions." Joanna raised herself on one elbow to look down at him, her hair falling in a curtain around them. "I trust you, Caleb. I trust the plan. And for the first time in my life, I'm not running from my fears, I'm facing them." His eyes, blue as the Arizona sky, held hers with an intensity that still made her breath catch. "Have I told you today that I love you?" The words, still new between them, sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Not since last night," she teased gently. "A serious oversight," he murmured, pulling her down for a kiss that quickly deepened, breakfast and plans temporarily forgotten in the joy of discovery that had not dimmed in the days since their first true kiss. Later that morning, Caleb departed for Prescott with much fanfare, making sure that his absence would be noted by anyone watching the ranch. Joanna stood on the porch, waving goodbye with appropriate wistfulness, before returning to the house to prepare for what might come. The first day passed uneventfully. On the second, as evening approached, Pete spotted riders approaching from the east, 3 men moving cautiously. "It's them," he confirmed, lowering his spyglass. "Vale, Thornton, and that hired gun of theirs." Joanna's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. "Everyone in position," Pete nodded. "Sheriff's men are hiding in the barn. Hank and the boys are spread out, all within earshot of the house. Marshal Jones is in the kitchen with Mrs. Daniels." He patted the revolver at his hip. "We won't let them near you, Mrs. Tucker. Remember, we need them to reveal their intentions," Joanna reminded him. "I have to appear vulnerable enough that they'll speak freely." The plan called for Joanna to receive them alone in the parlor, with the windows open so that those hidden outside could hear. The lawmen would wait for Benjamin or Thornton to explicitly state their intentions before making their move. As the riders drew closer, Joanna smoothed her dress and took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation to come. This was the moment that would determine her future, whether she would live in fear or in freedom. The knock, when it came, was surprisingly polite. Joanna opened the door to find Benjamin standing on the porch, hat in hand, looking for all the world like a concerned brother paying a social call. Behind him, Thornton and the gunman remained mounted, watchful. "Joanna," Benjamin said, his voice oozing false warmth. "You're looking well." "Benjamin," she replied coolly, "what brings you here?" "I heard your husband's away on business," he said, glancing past her into the seemingly empty house. "Thought it might be a good time for us to talk, clear the air between us." Joanna hesitated, as if considering, then stepped back. "You can come in," briefly. She led him to the parlor, aware of Thornton dismounting and following at a distance, the gunman remaining outside as a lookout. Everything was proceeding as expected. "Would you like some tea?" she asked, playing the role of reluctant hostess. "No, thank you," Benjamin replied, taking a seat without invitation. "I'll come straight to the point, sister. I've heard rumors that you're unhappy here, that this marriage was hasty and perhaps not what you expected." Joanna arranged her features into a mask of resigned sadness. "News travels fast." "It does indeed." Benjamin leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "I've come to offer you a way out, Joanna, a fresh start." "A fresh start," she echoed, allowing skepticism to color her tone. "Like the fresh start you promised when you sold me to Harrison. Or perhaps like the one you arranged with Mr. Thornton." At the mention of his name, Thornton appeared in the parlor doorway, his cold eyes assessing Joanna with a proprietary gaze that made her skin crawl. "Mrs. Tucker," he said, his voice as smooth and dangerous as a rattlesnake. "I believe we have unfinished business. The only business between us, Mr. Thornton, is the money you paid my brother for me, as if I were a mare at auction." Joanna's voice was stronger now, her fear giving way to righteous anger. "Money I'm sure he's long since gambled away." Benjamin's face hardened, the mask of brotherly concern slipping. "Don't be dramatic, Joanna. What was I supposed to do? The ranch was failing, and you were the only asset left with any value." The casual cruelty of his words hung in the air, damning in their honesty. Outside, Joanna knew the lawman would be taking note. "So you admit it," she pressed. "You sold me your own sister for money, twice, technically," Benjamin said with a shrug, "and I'd have gotten away with it if Tucker hadn't interfered." Thornton stepped further into the room. "A situation we're here to rectify. Your husband won't be back for days, Joanna. Plenty of time for us to be well away from here." His hand moved to the inside of his coat, producing a folded document. "I have papers here, already signed by your brother, transferring guardianship of you to me in the event your marriage is found." "Invalid." "Invalid." Joanna's surprise was genuine. "On what grounds?" "Coercion," Benjamin supplied. "You'll testify that Tucker forced you into marriage against your will, threatening you if you refused. The judge in Yuma is a friend of mine. He'll grant an annulment quickly enough." "And then?" Joanna asked, though she already knew the answer. Thornton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Then you'll come with me to my ranch in Texas. I've made special arrangements for you there, accommodations worthy of your particular charms." "You mean to keep me as your slave," Joanna stated flatly, dropping all pretense. "To use me as you please, just as Harrison did." "I paid good money for you," Thornton said, his voice hardening. "Twice what you're worth, truth be told, but I don't like losing what's mine." "I was never yours," Joanna replied, rising to her feet, "and I never will be." Benjamin stood as well, his patience visibly wearing thin. "Enough of this, Joanna. Get your things. We're leaving now." "No, Benjamin, I don't think she is." The new voice from the doorway made all three turn. Caleb stood there, his expression cold as he leveled his revolver at Thornton. Behind him, the sheriff and marshal appeared, their own weapons drawn. "You're under arrest, both of you," the marshal said, stepping into the room. "Human trafficking is a federal offense, gentlemen. The testimony we just heard is more than enough to see you both hang." Benjamin's face drained of color. "This is a trick. She set us up." "You set yourself up, Vale," Caleb replied, moving to Joanna's side. "All your sister did was give you enough rope to hang yourself." As the lawman moved to disarm and handcuff the stunned men, Thornton made a desperate lunge toward Joanna. Caleb's reaction was instantaneous. He stepped between them, his fist connecting with Thornton's jaw in a blow that sent the older man sprawling. "That," Caleb said as the marshal hauled Thornton to his feet, "is for thinking you could ever touch my wife." Outside, there was a brief commotion as the hired gun attempted to flee, only to be quickly subdued by Hank and the ranch hands. Within minutes, all 3 prisoners were secured and being led to waiting horses for the journey to Prescott, where they would face justice. As the grim procession departed, Joanna stood on the porch beside Caleb, his arm around her waist, anchoring her against the emotional storm that threatened to overwhelm her now that the confrontation was over. "It's done," he said softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "They can never hurt you again." The tears she had suppressed during the confrontation flowed freely now, not of fear or pain, but of relief and liberation. Years of anxiety and dread washed away with each sob that Caleb's shirt absorbed as he held her close. "I love you," she whispered when she could speak again. "Not just for what you did today, but for everything, for seeing me as a person worth protecting when everyone else saw me as property, for giving me a home when I had nowhere else to go, for waiting until I was ready to truly be your wife." Caleb's arms tightened around her. "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done, Joanna Tucker, and the most rewarding." As the sun set over the Double T Ranch, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Joanna knew that the nightmare that had begun with her father's death was finally over. In its place stood a future brighter than any she had dared to imagine, one built on love freely given and received, on respect earned and offered, on a partnership of equals. The story of how Caleb Tucker had ensured Joanna Vale would never be sold again became something of a legend in the Arizona Territory. It was whispered in saloons and trading posts, embellished with each telling until the tale barely resembled the truth. Some said he'd faced down 20 men to rescue her. Others claimed he'd tracked her across 3 states to bring her to safety. The reality, as Joanna knew, was both simpler and more profound. One man had seen her value beyond what others could take from her. One man had offered protection without demanding submission. One man had given her the time and space to heal, to choose, to love on her own terms. And in that one man, she had found not just safety, but home. 5 years later, the Double T Ranch had prospered even beyond Caleb's ambitious plans. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, first with the arrival of their son James, now 3 and already showing his father's affinity for horses, and then with their twin daughters, Elizabeth and Sarah, barely a year old and already displaying the determined spirit of their mother. On this particular evening, as the autumn sun set over the land they both loved, Caleb and Joanna sat on the porch swing, watching James chase fireflies across the yard while the twins slept peacefully in their cradles nearby. "Any regrets?" Caleb asked, his arm around her shoulders as they swayed gently. Joanna looked up at the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, at the lines that hard work and laughter had etched around his eyes, at the mouth that still kissed her each morning as if it were the first time. "Only that I didn't find you sooner," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "We found each other exactly when we were meant to," he said, a philosophy they had come to share over the years. "Not a moment too late." As darkness fell and they gathered their children to go inside, Joanna paused for a moment on the threshold of their home. From frightened girl to respected rancher's wife, from victim to survivor, from property to partner, her journey had been long and often painful. But here, in the circle of Caleb's arms, surrounded by the family they had created together, she knew with absolute certainty that every step had led exactly where she was meant to be, and she would never be for sale again.